So just so I pronounce it correctly, tell me how to pronounce your name first
It's
of all.
Chiezan, like liaison, but
Okay.
with the CH.
Chiezan, and then your last name?
Tomczyk.
Tomczyk. Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, tell me about the temple monastery here and just a
Yeah.
little bit of its history.
Sure. So my teacher, the abbot here, is named Sokuzan. He was born and raised in Battle Creek. And in the early 1970s, he was introduced to the teachings of a Tibetan master. So as you know, there was the communist invasion of Tibet in the late 50s, and there was a huge diaspora. The monks, the citizens had to leave, and Trungpa Rinpoche somehow found his way to the United States and started teaching here. So Sokuzan met Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche in 1973 and really began practicing pretty intensively and went to seminary in 1980. And then Trungpa died young at 47. And that was in 1987. And then Sokuzan met his Zen master from Japan, Kobun Chino Roshi. So he'd been studying for decades. And it kind of started out as just a small study group here in town. He started in the 70s, people getting together, practicing meditation, reading about meditation and Buddhism. And kind of fast forward, I graduated college in 2012, and I had met Sokuzan a few years beforehand. And I said, I'm looking at, moving somewhere for a year to practice meditation before graduate school. I was planning on, going forward with a master's degree in geomorphology. And he said, well, why don't you move to Battle Creek? And I said, well, do you have a program? He said, no, but we could create one. So I was like, interesting. The other options were to move across the country, across the world. So I moved here in 2012, and under his guidance, started practicing meditation 6.5 hours a day. And very slowly, it began to build. And right now, we're at about 10 full-time residents. Because Buddhism's not a huge religion here in the U.S., a lot of us work outside of the monastery to support the practice and support the space. So it's an interesting combination of laity and monastic life put together. I'm lucky enough to be able to do this full time, and I oversee people that are coming to visit us from all over the country and all over the world now to practice meditation retreats with us. So we are a fully functioning monastery that is very much interested in being a part of the world.
So then tell me a little bit about your personal religious background and how
Sure.
you came to Buddhism.
I was raised Roman Catholic.
Okay.
And was a member of the church through high school. In college, I started kind of, I think a lot of people that age really go through big emotional changes, and I was struggling a lot with different, you might call it depression or whatever. And I really tried going into the church more. I decided to read the Bible front to back, and I just wanted to know what else was out there, so I looked at some different Protestant churches. I started going to a synagogue occasionally to see what they were doing. Hey, Chiezan. Chiezan's one of the resident monks here. You maybe just do like bare bones. Yeah, thanks. They're getting ready. We've got a 2.5 hour sit coming up, so you'll hear some noises, and that's to let the monks know like enough of nap time. Come meditate. But yeah, so I tried a lot of different stuff. I tried traditional medicine, I tried counseling, therapy, that kind of stuff. And what really connected with me actually was kind of what you're doing, was this interfaith dialogue. I went to a full service where they had representatives from all the different churches speaking, and I just really appreciated not everyone had to be in agreement, but the respect to talk in front of people. And it wasn't so much Buddhism that magnetized me as meditation practice. And it felt like here was a tool for me to look very closely at what was happening and try to understand that, not get rid of my negativity, not try to shut it out or pretend like it's actually positivity, but just really look at that. So I started meditating every day, and I didn't like it. It's hard. and it kind of evolved over time. And even moving here into the monastery, I moved in considering myself a secular meditator. Like, I did not recognize myself as a Buddhist.
Okay.
And it just kind of happened very naturally, which it seems like the best way it could have happened. Instead of out of an idea of who I wanted to be, it just flowed very naturally. And then it was about 6 years ago now that I was received monastic ordination. So took those vows and have been helping with the monastery.
Well, and that's, I mean, that leads into my next question is, so what then are those kind of central ideas and practices? What does it mean to be a Buddhist?
Yeah. As you know, it was interesting, we were talking earlier about how many forms of Christianity there are. Just like everyone's looking at it from a different way, and Buddhism's not really any different.
Sure.
There's just a very, very diverse background with Buddhism. And to me, if we were to look at the core of what most Buddhists could, agree upon, it would start out with just being kind, to be kind, but to begin to understand the fundamental nature of being. In Buddhism, we talk about egolessness, that we endeavor to see the fundamental nature, which is not the identity that we ascribe to ourselves. It's not what's created through the phenomenal world. And lots of people try to talk about it, but it's all just kind of, the example my teacher uses, it's like a cookbook. It's great, but you can't eat the cookbook. You can read about making a cake, but you've got to bake the cake and taste it.
It's very practice-oriented.
Very heavily practice-oriented. The way we practice it, we don't practice it as a belief system. It's considered a non-theistic religion, meaning that the Buddha was not a god, not to be worshipped. He's not divine. He just represents, he saw something about his mind, he taught it to others, and somehow 2,500 years later, people are still trying to see what that is. So it's very much about looking closely at everything for oneself, to look very closely, but you also kind of have to look out for those tricks of ego. Like, you can't just look at it out of your bias and your opinions and your prejudice, but to actually see the total package, not just what you're looking at, but who it is you think is looking, and that the whole space really is to be investigated.
So is there then, would you say, a Buddhist worldview? You used the word non-theist. Is there some explanation for existence, for creation, for...
There's not much of a story in that area. Now, if you were to go back, I think if you look at a lot of religions, they synthesize traditional stories that were cultural. So if you look at that, you might find a lot of Hindu influence, because Hinduism was the predominant religion of India. There's a story that says the Buddha was asked about those questions and he just remained silent. And I think that's, for some of us, a really helpful thing, because we can get so consumed in trying to analyze what's happening outside of us, but as long as this is misunderstood, we're still seeing it through that scrim, that patina of, confusion or delusion. So to really see the ways in which, we're creating that misunderstanding within ourselves, with the idea that the world becomes much clearer after that.
Is there a concept of an afterlife or something beyond life in...
Yeah, and again, you're going to get a lot of different, some Buddhists, and most people often associate reincarnation with Buddhism and that kind of stuff. And I think the way we practice here in particular, and it's not to say you wouldn't find another group in Kalamazoo or Detroit or Grand Rapids that wouldn't say something different, but we don't know, and I think it's okay to acknowledge that. We can have some ideas that may look a particular way, like you were saying, you've got 3 children. My son's very young, and he came into this world with a lot of energy, like a lot of personality. It's like, you didn't get that from me, like. So something's definitely happening. What specifically is pretty unclear. So again, it seems that when that transition comes, when it's time for this body mind to go back into the elements, it seems like if you can be very clear about what you're looking at, that transition can be a lot more smooth. It seems a lot of times there's so much fear around death that the moment of death is very chaotic for some people, and perhaps with a little more what we would call mind training, that there might be some ability to see what's happening.
So then, I mean, you've talked about the ego. What was the term you used? Egoism.
Ego.
But I mean, where is that kind of the foundation from a moral standpoint then of how you approach moral issues and decisions and choices? What is it that, I guess, what is it that, you know, that determines right and wrong for you?
Yeah. So I like the term, and it's been used before, situation ethics, that we need to be very present. So if we predetermine how every single situation should be addressed, we kind of don't appreciate it in its totality. We don't see those times where a different approach might be necessary. And the example that, Sokuzan's used, and this is one that, you can kind of create a story around, is if someone were to come up to your door pounding, help me, please, somebody's after me, hide me, and you hide them in the house, and someone comes and says, hey, have you seen so-and-so? And if you say, well, I cannot tell a lie, they're in my closet, So situation ethics, so being able to look at every situation very closely, and if something's unclear, waiting. Something's not clear, maybe there's something else that needs to be seen. And Buddhism also does talk about something called basic goodness. That there is a basic foundational, at the bottom of everything there is goodness. And when I was 23, I started working in prisons. Started out at Huron Valley Women's Facility in Ypsilanti, and then with Sokuzan we were going into 4 different facilities in Muskegon and Ionia and Jackson. And you meet men and women that have had really hard lives and done really terrifying things, but when you talk to them, there's still a human being there. There's still a basic goodness, and it's not to dismiss the judicial system, but to see if we can't reconnect with that instead of concretizing an identity as a villain, a bad person. So I think that our ability to act out of compassion comes from reconnecting or going back and seeing that basic goodness, that basic sanity that's been called your birthright.
Looking at the world as it is today, in some ways, I guess it might be hard to accept that there is a basic goodness in people underlying,
Yeah.
a lot of the things that we see. How would you respond to that? The presence of, of evil in the world, and
so another foundational teaching of Buddhism is dependent origination, and that means that no one thing comes from itself. That everything is dependently arisen, just like, if you were to look at this tree, it's not just inherently a tree. It had to be planted, it had to be watered, it had to have sun, it had to have room to grow. And so when we see these things happening in the world, they're heartbreaking, but they're also dependently originated. You can't say, here is the sole cause of this.
Sure.
So I think that it's kind of all of our responsibility to look at what we've done into creating a culture that has so much tension and so much friction, and what we can do to help alleviate that and bring more of that softness and that kindness. So I think that for me as a monk, a lot of that comes down to seeing the warfare within myself. If you're fighting with yourself, you're probably going to find somebody outside of yourself to fight with. But I certainly wish I had, some sort of answer for everything that's happening.
What would you say is kind of if there's an underlying problem, that Buddhism seeks to address? What's the problem and what's the answer?
That's a great question. I really want to watch this series of talks. I want to hear what everyone has to say about this. That's so interesting. In Buddhism, the underlying problem is a belief in the solid self, that we function out of hope and fear, this constant struggle and warfare, hope and fear, hope and fear, hope and fear. And it is so suffocating. There's no room to breathe, there's no space, there's no ability to function. I think that the solution is variable, and it's really something I try to be very careful about. Buddhism's not a religion that proselytizes. So I know for me, meditation practice seems to help me get to the root of that so that I can live a kinder life. For other people, it might be a different route, so I'm not sure what the solution is, but I think that if people were to actively begin to look at what they take for granted, and if they were to look at their beliefs and just help them understand what that is for themselves, it's not about finding security and like, now I'm safe, now I'm on, balanced ground, but that you can be in the midst of everything that's happening and continue to function out of space and compassion.
What do you think, as people think about Buddhism, maybe they have some stereotypes or misperceptions. What do you think would be some of those things, and how would you correct those?
They think we all know Kung Fu.
Yeah.
I don't try to correct that because that's great.
Yeah.
I don't, but if they want to think that. I don't know. I could tell you things that people misperceive, like the worshiping of the Buddha.
Right.
A lot of people think that that's our God or deity, and no, it's just like these images. They're more, sometimes we can't see that we are compassionate. So maybe we look at something that represents compassion, and maybe we can't see that we have wisdom, so we might look at something that represents wisdom until you see, no, that's right here, the wisdom's here, the compassion is here. But I would be really hesitant to correct anybody. A lot of times, even when people start telling me about Buddhism as, their own path being something different, I just kind of listen and just try to appreciate what they have to say. And if they ask a question, then I answer it. Or if they want to know more, then I'll talk about it. But I think you kind of have to be careful not to take the intelligence away from that person. They might need to be confused a little bit longer so they really come to an understanding for themselves. Seems to be kind of the case with most things. I could convince people and do a great presentation about why everyone should meditate, and that might inspire somebody for a little bit. But if they haven't actually tasted it for themselves, if they haven't actually seen the value in it, eventually they'll just move on to something else. So really allowing people to come into this at their own time and speed and out of their own understanding.
So I'm curious, you said you had a background with the Catholic Church, and is there a Buddhist perspective, or even just your own personal perspective in terms of about Jesus or about Christianity? Obviously, Christianity's very, complicated and multifaceted.
Yeah.
But what would you say to that?
I think that what I appreciate is just the amount of openness Buddhism provides. That nothing that we do or practice in particular would be contradictory to people practicing Christianity. And as I said, we have people from Christian churches all the time that want to come learn to meditate. They don't need to be Buddhists. They don't need to read Buddhist teachings. They just want to practice to help them look at their minds. So, they go to church, they study the Bible, they pray, and they meditate. And if you look even throughout the Christian tradition, there's a strong tradition of contemplative Christians and contemplative practices. So it's not something unique to Buddhism that's not present in Christianity. And just like everything else, endeavoring not to come to any conclusions. So it's certainly not a rejection of Christianity or Christ. But probably important for us to look at it. Everything should be investigated thoroughly. And as I said, I read through the Bible as a younger man. It's been a while. But even reading through the Gospels, it's like, yeah, that sounds great. Do that. Let's do that. You read through the Sermon on the Mount. Clothe people. Feed people. Be kind to people. I think he seemed like a pretty good guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And, just to say one more thing about it, you actually do find a lot of synthesis or overlap amongst the two. And this is, coming back again to my Catholic upbringing. So again, just one aspect of Christianity, but there's actually a lot of literature that's been written by both Buddhists and Catholics about just this, what we would call the Bodhisattva ideal or the Christ ideal. Like, if you're familiar with like St. Augustine's Imitations of Christ, to just like try to embody that kindness. So I think there's a lot that can be done together, and there's even a Jesuit priest I talked to out east a number of years back. He's a Jesuit priest, and he's also an ordained Buddhist monk. So again, I think that if we just go based on what we think those two things are, we'd say those are not compatible. But you begin to go into it and you see that Buddhism isn't trying to take anything away from anybody, and it's not saying you have to reject or believe in anything, so it's more of a way working with the mind.
I think that really covers all the things that I had. Is there a question I should have asked? Is there some other question that you think would help?
No, I appreciate what you're doing, because it just, it seems like there's such a sense of tribalism that if you're not in my tribe, you're against my tribe. And like I said, we don't need to believe in the same things or agree on the same things to cooperate and to be kind to one another. And I also think I wouldn't necessarily say it's dangerous, but sometimes people fall into this intense mindset of relativism, which would be the other extreme, to just say it's all the same thing, and it's not. It's not supportive to do that. So I think it's really helpful when people can kind of find that path and say, I'm going to take this all the way down. I'm going to go, instead of, well, I like this, and just all the while just kind of picking the things that support our existing beliefs. Religion should challenge us. It should be painful sometimes. It should be difficult. The other Christian book that I've come back to time and time again is The Dark Night of the Soul by John of the Cross. And just that type of spiritual awakening, for that to happen, is not comfortable. It's not going to be always that relationship of a child and a parent. At some point, you've got to go through those struggles of becoming an adolescent in your spirituality and an adult in your spirituality. Yeah.
So if someone wanted to understand more about Buddhism, where would you direct them? What their particular resources that?
Well, come talk to us.
Yeah.
We're happy to. It's, as we keep coming back to, it's so varied that to kind of just say, well, Google it.
Sure.
Go down some rabbit hole with that. But I think it's good to talk to a living person. I think that religious teachings are most powerful when they're a living tradition, handed down. I received this from my teacher, and they received it from their teacher, kind of thing. So we, when we receive ordination, we have a lineage that we go name by name by name all the way back. So I would say, talking to somebody who's been practicing for a few decades is probably the best way to go about it. If that's kind of intimidating, there's tons of books on meditation, and any topic you could want. Someone's probably written a book about meditation in relationships, meditation in drugs, meditation in, work and finance. And it's everywhere.